Hey guys, so this is going to be a review of Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass is the first in a series by Sarah J. Maas. I've heard quite a lot about this series, both positive and negative opinions, and the positive opinions, there were enough of them from people whose opinions I trust for me to want to give it a shot. My experience with it was a little bit less than I was hoping for, just so you can kind of have a gauge on what the temperature of this review is going to be. It may seem like I'm bashing it at some points, but I'm not trying to. The truth is that I do see a lot of potential here. I just want to express why it kind of fell short for me. First things first, the story surrounds Selena Sardathian, an 18-year-old assassin that, when we meet her, has just spent the last year within the salt mines of Endovier being punished for her crimes. She's been freed from this prison by Dorian, the Crown Prince of Aderlin, which is basically a country that's trying to take over all of Aurelia, the world in which this takes place in order to fight as Dorian's champion amongst others like her, assassins, thieves, murderers, other prisoners, etc., that other people have chosen as champions in a contest held by the King of Aderlin. If she were to win said contest, then she would become the King's assassin, his personal assassin for 4 years, and then be given her freedom and kind of have her crimes pardoned, and she'd be able to do whatever she wanted from that point on. Having been at the salt mines for the past year, she's a bit out of shape. She must first train with Dorian's best friend, the captain of the guard, the King's Guard, Kale, and Kale has this sort of immediate suspicious attitude towards Selena. He surrounds her with guards, never likes to have her around Dorian, always questions her motives and her plans, etc. He's just very protective of the prince and takes his job very seriously. Shortly after the contest begins, each contestant having to do these certain tests that are set by the king's weapons master Brullo, something strange starts to happen. The contestants one by one begin to be killed and are found all torn apart and dismembered in various hallways. Selena must face the various tests that she's been given, and while attempting to figure out what else is going on and see if there's any way that she can attempt to stop it. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that does really sound like it would be an interesting story, but honestly it just kind of disappointed me more and more as I went along. Let's just talk about a few things here. First off, the world building, which is basically non-existent. Aurelia as a whole is just incredibly vague. Vague history, vague religion, vague magical possibilities with a vague King of Aderlin that I can't help but feel sort of indifferent towards because he's gone for most of the book. He leaves right after the contest begins. That's apparently trying to take over everything by basically getting rid of magic, outlawing magic, and killing anyone that gets in his way, which I also can't help but feel a bit indifferent towards because the entire book is just stuck in this one spot where honestly not much is really happening. It's just that the book skips over so much of what could be important to feeling empathy towards the characters and the situations they're in an effort to focus on things that are far less important. Selena is supposed to be the best assassin in the entire world, and only at the age of 18, but we see absolutely none of that, not even a little bit. She shoots some arrows and climbs some walls, spars a few times, throws up while running a lot, and that's about it. She's supposed to have these amazing abilities. I mean, we're constantly told about them. Sarah J. Maas like hammers it in that she has these amazing abilities, and everybody apparently knows her name because of these abilities that she has. And yet we never see her do anything that's even remotely assassin-like. I mean, people constantly sneak into a room without her noticing. They trick her, they fool her, and they read her like an open book, which she is for the most majority of the time. It was basically all tell and no show. At first, I liked that we weren't being bombarded with backstory at the beginning, but I was hoping we'd get to learn at least a little bit more about her and at least see some of these skills that she's supposed to have sometime throughout the book. Even several of the little tests she's supposed to do are just vaguely skimmed over. Like, it'll say like, oh, we had a few more tests and then this happened. And it's just like, those are what's important, aren't they? I mean, honestly, the whole contest barely seemed to matter at all. Instead, we see like Selena sneak into a ball that she wasn't supposed to go to, only to do nothing but dance with Dorian, while everybody looked on at them thinking to themselves, how cute and odd. I'll take a moment to stray away from talking about the rest of the characters for a second to just kind of mention the budding love triangle that kind of took over the vast majority of the story, because honestly it seemed to be the most important thing that was happening most of the time, and honestly basically defined the personalities of these characters way more than necessary. Don't get me wrong, okay, I like romance in books. I'm not opposed to romance in books, but when you focus on it in a book that is supposed to be about this independent, really independent, kick-ass assassin character, having her instantly think about, after being trapped in a labor camp for a year, how attractive these guys around her are and how attractive she was to them, it just seems really out of character. I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking those things, it just didn't seem to fit. And then Dorian's personality is basically completely defined and shaped by how he feels about Selena. The first time that we read from his perspective is this short little, weird little couple paragraph section that basically describes Selena, like comparing her to stars, and this is after having just met her literally in that same chapter. I mean, his character just could have been a lot more interesting. We finally see him get a little bit interesting when he has some conversations with his father, but for the vast majority of the book, everything that he thinks and does is defined by Selena. I mean, the good development that we see that comes out when he speaks to the king, his father, is just really nice, as they don't see eye to eye, but that is just extremely rare, because the entirety of his thoughts are basically fawning over Selena, whom he honestly barely even knows. Then there's Kale, who's definitely more interesting, and after reading a bunch of reviews and seeing video reviews on this book, is probably the one that most people are rooting for in this little love triangle, is the captain of the guard and takes his job very seriously, except when he spends all of his time around Selena instead of, I don't know, actually going off and doing his job. To his credit though, he really does have a lot more going on in his head. He's very troubled by the gruesome, mysterious murders that are going on. He must deal with the possibility that his best friend is putting himself in danger by spending so much time with Selena, while he himself must face that he may have feelings for her despite everything that tells him not to. While Selena is honestly a bit of a jerk to him sometimes, he usually keeps his cool and generally just more blunt and protective than harsh. For a while though, at the beginning, Kale and Dorian really didn't seem that much different to me, but luckily as their time went on, their personalities became more distinctive, as did Selena's relationships with them. There's a few side characters. Keltane, this sort of highborn girl that believes Selena's name is Lillian, and is kind of a sort of girl-on-girl hatred antagonist. She kind of longs to be with Dorian for the status of it, and kind of obviously seems Selena as a threat to that. Then there's Nehemia, who is the princess of a country called Ilway, a place that's basically been conquered by the king of Adarlan, who has come to Adarlan's capital city to kind of make relations a bit better. She doesn't speak the language all that well, but immediately befriends Selena, and the two get along quite well, which is really a really nice thing to see in a book like this. It's kind of just two girls being friends kind of thing. Nehemia and her friendship with Selena and her general personality were some of my favorite parts of the book. Then there are a few others, like the king, whom, like I said, we barely see. Then some of the contestants, like Kane, who is just this big, kind of generally big and muscly guy with barely any personality other than, oh, this guy's huge and everybody thinks he'll win, except for the people that like Selena, who for some vague reason think that she'll be able to beat him. Then there's Nox, another contestant that Selena sort of befriends, or at least makes an ally of, who could have been a lot more interesting, but in reality doesn't really do much of anything. Other than that, the characters just don't really stand out all that much, and there's no real development. I honestly don't think there's any sort of change in any of their personalities at all from beginning to end. I guess they learned a couple of the different things that are going on around them, and we learned a few things about them, but none of them really had any sort of progression in their personalities or in their goals. The writing itself left a lot to be desired. There's just so much of that typical trying way too hard kind of writing in this, overwriting certain sentences to make them sound better than they actually are. It's hard to describe. It's just a bit frustrating because at times the sentences just don't flow naturally. Overall, this book just left a lot to be desired. Just way too much cliched romance and an abundance of flirting, weird flirting that takes up whole pages, vague backstory and world building, a main character that just doesn't live up to what she's supposed to be, how the author views her to be, how everybody in the story apparently views her to be, an extremely predictable story with major plot points, one being honestly like the antithesis of a plot twist. Just really predictable and uninteresting, vague understanding of what's actually possible in this world, and a final act that's just so anticlimactic. It doesn't make me feel much of anything, really. I feel like the actual plot of this book could have been told in 100 pages or less, and that this is just kind of a little setup of what's going to happen next. It just feels really incomplete and focused on all of the wrong things. I don't really even get why this book is called Throne of Glass. The King of Adoulin has a glass castle, and that might be important for some reason that we aren't told, but Selena doesn't even live in the glass castle when she's there. She lives in the stone part underneath of it. And it's not like she's fighting for the throne. What does the Throne of Glass have anything to do with the story whatsoever? Nothing. And also, the blurb in the front of the book annoys me a lot. It compares, this little blurb here compares the book to The Hunger Games and Game of Thrones. And I know that's not the author's fault that it's on there, but this book is nothing like either of those two things. Not even a tiny little bit. Look, like I said, I knew it was going to sound like I would be bashing a bunch of stuff in this, but when a book gives me certain expectations based on how it's described on the back or whatever, I kind of have to hold it up to a certain standard, and I just thought it could have been a lot better than it actually was. I've heard that the second book is a major improvement over this one, and despite what I said, I do have a sort of an interest to see what happens next, so maybe I'll give the second book a chance sometime. It's just that I have so much other stuff to read, I don't know if I'll ever get to it. I mean, I'm not sure. I gave this book 2.5, somewhere between 2.5 to 3 stars. It was alright. It wasn't bad at all. It wasn't as good as I was hoping it to be, and it was really unfocused and just not as good as it could have been, and that's disappointing. So yeah, that's everything I had to say about this. Let me know if you've read this, what you think, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks so much for watching.